Hello everybody, welcome to this little webinar on Twinmotion for the owner-occupiers. And just before we do that, let me just introduce myself. My name is Jeff. Let me just jump over to that next slide then. Just a little option here to show you who I am. My name's Jeff, and I've worked in CAD design for quite a few years now, mostly in Max and 3D Studio Max, etc., and especially for the AEC industry and manufacturing, and also the video games industry. So that's who I am, and I'm very pleased to be part of Symmetry looking at this presentation for us today. What we have here, what we're going to look at now is Twinmotion. Before we look at Twinmotion, if you have any questions you want to ask of me, you're more than welcome. Just pop them in the chat and then we'll look at them at the end of the presentation here. So what my presentation is about today is Twinmotion, but how it can relate to owner-occupiers, space planning, this type of thing. So the idea is that I've got a Revit model and I'm looking at my Revit and I want to bring that into Twinmotion. I want to look at various options within Twinmotion. So what I'll do is let's have a start immediately just by looking at a little bit of Revit, nothing too outrageous. So if I just come into here, you can probably see my Revit here now. This little project here, very simple little project, is a floor plan that I'm working on with a client. Actually, it's a client that is a retail outlet, and this is one of their offices where they actually head office, administrative office. So it's essentially what it is just a floor plan here of our retail unit. There's a few families in here, so these desks, workstation desks are part of the families. This is the floor plan here. The idea of the presentation here is that I've got fire escape so on this side and I've got fire escape up here. We've got an area here that is essentially the client is saying, look, we create shop units. So we want to have an area at the head office where we can plan out arrangements, distribution arrangements of visuals so that we can set up and experiment with our retail units. So this is what we're all about here. So it's a very simple little project I'm bringing on board here for us today. Before I jump into the Twinmotion part of it, just as a little other added little bit of information here for you, if you are thinking about Twinmotion and thinking about working with Twinmotion and you're working on versions 2023 of Revit, if you're working on 2023 of Revit, you may have already looked at Twinmotion by importing what we call the datasmith here. So this is the datasmith, so we can export a datasmith file from Revit into Twinmotion. Now, if you are using 2023, if you go to the updates from your Autodesk account, go to the updates now, 2023.1 here, you'll notice that if I come over to my view tab now in my Revit, I do actually have the direct connection here now. So if you are downloading Revit, if you are updating Revit to 2023.1 and also 2024, of course, you will have Twinmotion sitting here on the view tab. So you don't actually need to go and download the datasmith because that's actually part of the update here. So in your view tab here, you've got your Twinmotion, so we could open in Twinmotion. We've got a direct link synchronization, direct link connections there, but we can still export the files, export message and export settings. So for example, in my here, I've got option of exporting various settings, dimensions, data, any of the metadata that we can take through into Twinmotion. So here we've got this little project in Revit. Like I said, it's a sample here, and I've made it a little bit easier for us to work with. So with that in mind, if I jump over to our Twinmotion here, I've got Twinmotion here. Here's my Twinmotion of that very project. So what I'm actually doing here now, let me just, whoops. What I'm actually doing here now is showing you this model coming in to Twinmotion. And here it is. I brought it into Twinmotion. And the reason why I wanted to show this here like this, I've got several opportunities to view for you. One of them is that I've got a view here, for example. I've created this view here. This is an overall view of the floor plan, just as it is now. So what I've done here is imported this into Twinmotion and thought about how we're going to implement the project. So you can notice here that I've got various desk units in here, workstations. So these particular workstations, of course, these materials, these textures, are a little bit better or a little bit more detailed than the Revit families. So when I import this geometry into Twinmotion, it would come into the hierarchy here, and there I could then right click on the object and just replace. So for example, if I had, I don't know, I'll just click on that spotlight there, but if I could right click on it and replace it. So if I was coming back over to one of these desks here that was my Revit desk, I could just right click on here, replace it. And that's what I've done here. So I've got my Revit geometry, but I've just done a replacement here for that. So you can see here, I've got a principal view that I'm creating. So when I'm with Twinmotion, I'm creating views, and then we can manipulate these views as we move forward. So here I've got a simple view here. If I look back, if I just click on that again here, boom, there it is. It brings us back to that view. So the idea is that I can bring that view in, and I can then think about this from my as my overall view. The owner, the occupier, can think, well, what can I do here? Like I said, I've got a view here that is the position now of my work, of my building. My office space is defined here like this. However, I do want to actually have that refurbishment part done. So in my structure here, when I've imported, I've actually put all the geometry that represents the refurbishment into one container here. It's not grouped, it's like a container, so it's a hierarchy. It's like putting it into a folder. So all the geometry that is even the Revit walls and everything like that that make up what becomes the refurbishment is put into another folder here. So from a render point of view or visual point of view, visual cues, I can see how I can import that in here. So I've created a view which is basically the plan, and I've got another view here that is now showing me where that is actually happening. So I've got this view coming in here, and therefore my refurbishment is active in this view. So once again, I'm turning things off, turning things on. So the idea here is that I've got an overall view, which I think is useful, especially for the owner occupier, so you can get a nice feel of the visual cues on what we're building here. And each one of these views, of course, is it's interactive, so I can move around on any of these views and zoom in and just check to see if anything is you know, flagging up anything. So for example, I've got some other views here. For example, I've got this general office here, the fire escapes, the roof outlets are here. But if I look at the before the refurbishment here, so I've got a floor plan, I've got a view here from, I'm stood up here like this, click on here. So I'm looking from the main office across to the area that is where the refurbishment is going to go on. So it's going to be fitted in here. So I could be stood here, can move around, turn and tumble around here, see how things are looking as well. So I can get line of sight, everything I need to understand in here. So I create a view that gives me that. The other aspect here, of course, is that my view, when I'm in here, I can look at line of sight. So for example, I'm here, I jump back to this view, for example, you can see that this is where my refurbishment program is going on. But over in this corner, I've got, as you can see, we've got a fire escape there. So I've got a fire escape here, and I've got these characters walking around here indicating where the fire escape is. So in this position, in this particular project here, you could see that if I came over now and come into my office space here, general office here now, when the refurbishment is completed, I would see that, now if I'm in here now, here, I would see that the refurbishment in here is not giving me a line of sight for that fire escape anymore. So I would need to understand to help people understand where that fire escape is there. If I obviously I move around, I can still move around and walk along here anywhere I want in the project. It's very simple. Give me a good understanding of where everything is. Very easy in our Twinmotion here to do this. So for example, I'm coming all the way around here. I can see I've got the fire escape is just there. So having fire escapes is flagging up something for me now. So I'm thinking to myself, as the owner occupier, I need to support fire escapes. So what I can do here is create another view here. So like this view here, I create another view that gives me an opportunity to tell my clients, tell my tenants, look, this area here is area A, and we have an area A fire escape here, and we have an area B and an area B fire escape here. And this type of thing is a visual cue to where fire escapes are. Now, also what I have here is that I've got a reception area here down here. So for example, if I'm in the reception of my building here, if I come to one of those views again, there's my reception here. I'm in the reception area now. This refurbishment is going on here. I'm in the reception where I can welcome my visitors. And one of the aspects I quite like about Twinmotion, and I've seen this done with a few of our clients now, is that the animation that we have here, this particular animation, or rather this particular view that I can animate, this actually can be positioned, put onto a screen in our reception. So if you've got guests coming in, the idea or the concept of fire escapes is not just having signage on the walls. It's more about understanding that subconsciously you're there and you're seeing that there's a fire escape here. So it's much more of a visual cue. So if I'm in here in the reception, you would see that as I we move into the area here, you'd actually know that actually there's a fire escape around the corner here. So if I put my people on again, you could see that the fire escape would be through that way, even though we can't actually see it in this. We've got a visual cue by having the animation, and we've got a visual here as well. So we can do some stills of this, we can do animations of this. We've got characters moving on here, which is working quite nicely. So from a point of view of fire escapes, I think it's really useful that we can use Twinmotion to give guidance in a 3D cue, a visual cue. And that works very well. So for example, here could even have a fire escape visual here, where we can, there's the visual of that fire escape. We can have the visual of the other fire escape as well. So generally speaking, like I said, I'm getting more and more visual cues building up from my Twinmotion. As I said, the project itself is indeed a retail outlet. So within that retail outlet, they have a reception here. Like I said, fire escapes, concepts can be visual as well, as I just mentioned. But through here, you can see that this, I can just walk through here like this, and this is where my refurbishment here, or my retail test area. So what I've done with this is, once again, I can create another view here. So here's a view that has got my retail. So I'm looking at my retail area here, and this area now is giving me an opportunity. I can move into here using my movement keys again. I can come through, it's animated, I can have the doors animate, the doors open, and I can move through here and start to get a feel of how I'm laying out this particular view here. These are clothing objects. I'll show you a bit more about it in a second. Lighting, people, all of this really nice visual cues. So I've got an option here for our tenant to say, well, this is, we could do this in the clothing. And I've also done another one of the same area, so I can switch off the clothing and turn on the shop units here. So I've got a concept also of shop units. So in other words, how do we deal with space? Can we experiment with the space that we have? And we can use Twinmotion to do all of that. So if I move in here, once again, I can look at the opportunity of, could I actually use this space to create these, this sort of supermarket concept here, or not, this type of thing. So essentially, from a visual cues, I think there's a lot we can do with Twinmotion in this regard. So the idea is that with Twinmotion here, or interior design work, or as I said, this work for owner occupiers, there's a lot that we can do here to give visual cues. So these are the principal views that I've created in this project. So I can actually not only create some views, but I've got opportunity of creating some animations here as well. So for example, that fire escape animation that we could put onto the monitor in the reception, I could actually have that as my rendered animation. So we can see we've got the area here, we've got people walking through, so we've got a really nice visual cue that we do actually have a fire escape here. And then if I run that animation through, you'd see that this is the animation that I would probably play out in that reception area to say to people, that the visitors or anything like that, look, this is the floor plan of our office. So if you're going to need to get out the fire escapes, this fire escape is here and it's here, and these is the animations I would make to support that visual cue there. The other the other bit in here is that we can set this all out. I can send this out to with Twinmotion. I can export it all out to a presentation. And so, for example, if I just come on to a presentation here, I'm just going to click on my presentation mode here. It's on the other screen, take a second or two to come together. But the idea that I can put this onto a presentation, and if I look at my cloud access here, for example, I can open my Twinmotion cloud access here. I can create that presentation, and then I could upload it to the cloud, and which means that I could then give that link to a client or a tenant and say, look, this is what we have here. So for example, this office refurb I'm doing here now, I can create a link here in the Twinmotion cloud, or a QR code here, or indeed if you're in the if you're the landlord, so to speak, and you want to embed this, you would be able to embed that into the website in there like this. So here it is, the project here in presentation view, like we would have on, like I said, on the web here. So if I just come back to here, on here, this office refurb is essentially the one I'm showing you here now. So once again, if you upload this to the Twinmotion cloud, you've got all of these features here. So essentially, this is what I've got here, is exactly what I've created here. We could run it through as a very simple animation. Here it run through here, so I would move from that view to that view to that view and so on, or indeed I can just simply jump to any one of my views like this, and I can move around like this, for example, through the presentation mode. So the presentation mode itself is this interface that you would give your client, which is really nice. Up here in the presentation mode, of course, I've got some features here that I can have a pedestrian mode or a fly-through mode. But what's really nice about this is that if you have your VR set up, you can directly link into the VR and move around on here as well. So once again, all of those cues or concepts I can use in any way that we like through here on this version here of the presentation. So let me I'm just going to exit the presentation there at the moment and come back into my Twinmotion here. Is that you will see that in our Twinmotion that there's a lot of geometry that we're using in here, in my particular one here. So if I jump back to say, let's come back to my office view here, for example. A few people have mentioned to me recently about working with Twinmotion and rendering with Twinmotion. And of course, we can do all of that. The one aspect that I just wanted to also mention is that whilst Twinmotion, I can use my Revit geometry in here. So from a point of view of my imports, I imported through the Datasmith here, the Revit geometry. And I've also got geometry in here that I've actually created in 3 Studio Max. So we can create geometry in other DCC applications like Max or Maya or even SketchUp or something like this, export them as FBXs and bring them in. And one of the aspects I tend to do with this is that I will then, in my media views here, I would then come into my user library. I would create a library. So for example, I've got the Revit retail sets are showing up here. So that geometry I've got there. I'll just turn off the guys walking by for the moment. So I've got these sets here. So what I've done, I've created these sets of furniture or display sets for the clothing sets. These are, some of them I made, some of them I've downloaded, but much of them I made. And so I've got a display set here that if I want to bring that in, of course, we can just drop that in. So this is what I like about Twinmotion, is that not only can I start with my Revit, but I can drop this in here, and there's my display there. So essentially, I'm looking at understand. Oops, let's just come back to here again. The library. I'm finding that people are saying, oh, it's difficult to scroll through the stuff. How do I deal with this? How can I find this? Well, like I said, user libraries are really important in here. And like I said, I've got those retail sets there. Another one I've done actually is one, obviously I don't need it for this interior, but I've got one for UK planting. So I just created a folder, and instead of scrolling through hundreds of North American trees and bushes and flowers and stuff like that, I've actually just created classic UK trees and stuff like this, a horse chestnut and you know, English yew and European beech and stuff like this. So I think it's very useful that we consolidate this, make this into a really nice container for our project here. So people are talking to me about this is, when I look at this now, this is what we'd call real time. So as I move around, of course, this is rendering real time. So this is what you're seeing, but very often you're going to want to send out a rendered view of this. So we have in Revit, we have a concept called path tracer in here as well, a path tracer in here. So this little icon up here talks about the path tracer. So if I clicked on path tracer here, it will now do a render. Now, of course, this presentation I'm doing now is obviously I can't leave it running for hours because of the presentation, but I can set the quality quite easily to create some quite nice renders. Now, this particular one I've just done here, you can see that it just run through there quite straightforward. If I look at the properties, of the view here, if I come back to the view there, where are we, this view here, and look at the properties of the render of this view, I can set the path tracer from here or there. So the path tracer here, we can actually set the path tracer to various view, low, medium, high. So for example, if I just jump this to a quick low render, very quickly you can see, boom, that goes around quite quick to give me a relatively low render. Very often this is what you want. It's very good. And then a medium render like this, of course, a little bit longer, but generally your workflow will create this. And then later on, we can do a higher render for your final quality. Now, all of this can be rendered out real time, of course, and then we can send it all, batch render it all together if we want. So here we've got there, that particular one comes through quite nicely there. Now, I will flag this up because some people mentioned to me about the path tracer recently, and they couldn't understand the quality. So I'm just going to mention that here, that if we do jump into settings and come to your path tracer here, you can preset these values. So for example, for a very low preset, I've just got what they call 8 samples. And then I've actually changed the medium set to be quite a bit higher. And so the medium set for mine is at 128 samples per pixel, and then the higher one is 1024. So in its default state, the one that's the medium preset is actually the high one. So this is why it's worth just looking at this. And that's, of course, is very dependent on your display card that you're using. So have a think about that with your work. Now, when we talk about images here, the rendering, and they look at image here, a lot of people are talking about size. So somebody actually a couple of days ago said to me, how do I make it a different size? Well, simply that we've got the image selected there. We've got graphic sizes here, of course. So very often I'll do a 1920 1080 render for HD, but of course we can go to 4K, 8K, or custom views, and it's very simple where we could set that up there. Just actually, lastly, to be honest, I'm going to jump over to this area here where I've got some lighting in here. This is something else that really was people were talking about, certainly for interiors, is lighting. how do I deal with lighting? Very, very easily. The lighting, I think the lighting is very, very good in here, because we're talking about IES data similar to the Unreal Engine. But what really is nice, I see that I've called this little bulb here, this one, my mood light. So I've got intensity, attenuation. So I can adjust the attenuation on this mood light up and down very easily, cone angle, all the usual lovely suspects here, but also color, shadows, and of course we've got another one here, nice one, it's the haze. So I can put a haze in here if you wanted to as well. So if you've got a little bit of mood, a little bit mood in there. The other one I quite like to look at in the IES is that we can add in any IES data, we can adjust reflection, and this concept here, which is called dawn to dusk. So in other words, I can render, if I move the time, of my day, whoops, let me just come off of that. If I just come to my time of day here, I can adjust the time of day. So as it gets to nighttime, the light would come on and go off in the daytime. And this is why sometimes people are saying to me, I can't get the light to work. It's just that the light itself has probably been set to dusk to dawn. So when you're working in the daytime, it's not going to appear, not going to come on. So really speaking, folks, I'm just looking at some nice features of Twinmotion in this regard. And to be perfectly honest, I think there's some good views here. So if I'm working on refurbishment projects, I can create the before, the after. I can position myself where I like to see. I can look at what if scenarios, laying out the floor plans. I've just done it with my little retail unit there, but you can have a floor plan for your desk layouts if you want, as much as you like. This is really what I like about it, and the reason is I can just get a lot of my containers in here. So for example, all these containers in here, if I come to let's say this view here, in essence, I could say, well, actually, I want a view where I need to show people I don't want any of my furniture in here, for example. So I could turn off my furniture, turn off my characters walking like this, if I just wanted an overall view of my floor plan. And then, you know, I could then set that, click on here to add an image, and there we have it. I've just got a new image of just the basic floor plan. It's as quick as that. And then we can add that into animations and so on. So the animation, as I said, I did an animation there of the fire, but I've got a general walkthrough animation here that we could run and then export that as an MPEG file or something like this. So I could actually have that run as well. So if you wanted to just show your clients, show your people and say, look, this is the floor plan and so on, we can do this. So this is basically a nice little animation here. What I'm really getting at is actually that with the geometry that we use in Revit, we can add in components, whether it be downloaded content or whether it be content from the libraries in here or Twinmotion content. We can keep that geometry moving forward. So I think it's quite important that we can plan things like the refurbishment. We can look at what if scenarios, we can look at aesthetic scenarios here. The one important one I quite like was that the fire escapes can be done there. So we can have a visual cue as to where fire escapes are on the floor. And also, as I mentioned, line of sight, we can experiment with understanding line of sight. As I mentioned a moment ago, if I've got my room here, can I get the line of sight around the back? So really speaking, folks, there's a little bit of an overview to be honest, for our work in Twinmotion. But the important aspect is here that I'm saying that with Revit, we've got a nice thread moving through from a visual concept. So this, at this stage now, we can create a lot. I can upload it. I can upload it to the cloud and put it on the cloud. Give my customers, clients a link, embed it into my web page and so on. But then when I'm happy with this, or when the project moves forward, this data itself, I can push this all over without any degradation of data or recreating anything again. I move this over into something like Unreal so that I can do a lot more immersive content as well, with the VR, clicking on doors, windows, finding the metadata, BIM data and stuff like this. So there we go. We've got a few concepts there. Just very quickly, last thing to say is that as you can see, I was just looking at my cloud here, and just to be aware that if you're working with your Revit straight away from Revit into Twinmotion, you don't have access to this. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't have access to it. It just means that if you start up your Twinmotion through Revit like this, then you do not have access to Twinmotion Cloud. What you'd need to do is access your Twinmotion through Epic Games. In other words, log into an Epic Games account and then use Twinmotion from here. So what that really means is it's not costing anything. It just means that if you want to use the cloud access for Twinmotion, then you're going to need to log in through here. In other words, create an account with Epic, so therefore you're logged in to the Twinmotion there. So even if you've got a project that you've created whilst you're working with your Revit version, you can still open that project in this version, of course, and then you have access to that cloud. The reason, of course, is that when you're working with Twinmotion through your Revit interface, you are logged in to your Autodesk account, and Autodesk don't run the cloud servers. It's Epic that are running the cloud service. So in order for you to have access to Epic's cloud servers, you need to be in an account. Doesn't cost anything anyway. So this is what I'm saying to some of the Revit users that are asking me about that.